Shalom. There's so much happening in this week's Torah portion of Vayetze, which begins in Genesis chapter 28 and verse 10. Our portion begins as Yaakov escapes to Haran per his mother Rivka's prophetic instructions. Rivka insisted that Yaakov flee from his brother Esau, who's angry on account of the blessings and out to murder him. Parashat Vayetze describes Yaakov's life there in Haran with Laban until the time comes for his return to the land of Israel. Of all our forefathers, it's Yaakov, soon to be divinely renamed Israel, who is the one that experiences exile. Our portion begins with Yaakov's dream of a ladder that spanned from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it, and Hashem standing at the top. This dream has many levels of meaning, and one understanding is that the dream itself alluded to the future exiles of the children of Israel. And as we learned last week, everything about this man Yaakov transcends his personal self and takes on a level of meaning for the entire nation, for all generations. And thus, his life in exile is a prototype for the nation of Israel's exiles throughout the millennia. The same holds true for all of the adventures that befall Yaakov. But there's one perhaps seemingly minor yet oft-recurring detail that shows up in the patriarch's life, which Torah takes pains to record. Stones keep showing up in Yaakov's life. So Yaakov arrives at the place, which we have learned is the place of the Holy Temple, and preparing to sleep, verse 11 informs us that he takes some of the stones of the place to set under his head. He sleeps and dreams, sees a ladder set upon the ground and extending to heaven. Hashem stands at the top of the ladder and speaks to him, blessing him. When Yaakov arises, verse 18 states that he took the stone which he had placed under his head and placed it as a monument and poured oil on its top. So, Torah recounts that when he prepared for sleep, he prepared stones, in the plural, many stones around his head. But when he awoke, they had become one stone. Our sages explain that the stones started arguing with one another. One said, "Let the tzaddik, the righteous man, lay his head on me." Another one said, "No, I want him to lay his head on me." Immediately, the Holy One, blessed be He, made them into one stone. And that's why verse 18 states, "And he took the stone," in the singular, that he had placed at his head. Sounds rather fanciful, no? Whimsical? But we'll get back to this later. Immediately afterwards, Yaakov makes a vow that if he safely returns to his father's home, then Hashem will be for him a God. And this stone, which I have placed as a monument, shall be a house of God. When Yaakov reaches the well in Haran, where the shepherds gather, they gather there all the flocks to drink, there is a great stone over the opening of the well, and all the shepherds gather there and roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water all the sheep, and then they return the stone to its place over the opening of the well. But when Yaakov sees Rachel coming with the sheep, he rolls the stone from the mouth of the well. 22 years later, when Laban is chasing after Yaakov and catches up, the two of them negotiate a treaty, and Laban suggests, "And now let us come and make a covenant, I and you, and let it be for a witness between me and you." Yaakov immediately responds by taking a stone. And Yaakov took a stone and raised it up as a monument. And Yaakov said to his brethren, meaning his children, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a mound, and they ate there over the mound. So when Laban suggested making a covenant to Yaakov, not only did Yaakov answer by setting aside a stone, he also called to all his children and told them to also take stones. There's nothing incidental or anecdotal or even minor in Torah, and we know that all the details that we are given in the lives of our forefathers are of great importance. Stones keep appearing in the story of Yaakov. And open up your heart in the deepest way in the world. Stones occupy such a significant place in the life of our forefather Jacob that he himself is referred to as the stone of Israel, as we find in the deathbed blessing that he himself bestowed upon his son Joseph in Genesis 49 and verse 24. From there, he shepherded the stone of Israel, which is a reference to himself. A well-known Talmudic teaching relates that each of the forefathers experienced a different perception of the Holy Temple. And through their individual insights, each one achieved a different understanding which characterized the spiritual work of their lives. And thus, Avraham called it a mountain, as we find in chapter 22 and verse 14, and as it is said, "This day on the mountain Hashem will be seen." Yitzchak called it a field, as we find in chapter 24 in verse 63. And Yitzchak went out to pray in the field, and Yaakov called it a house, as it states in our portion 28:19, and he called it the house of God. And it's noteworthy that in the future rectified world, messianic times, we are told that it's through the level of Jacob that all the nations of the world will seek out God in the holy temple, as the prophet Isaiah states in chapter 2 and verse 3, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of Hashem, to the house of the God of Jacob." To understand this on a simple level, each one of the forefathers blazed a trail. They forged a unique spiritual path and brought the world closer to a recognition of Hashem. The perception of Avraham, the first one who brought knowledge of Hashem into the world, symbolized by a mountain, magnificent and inspiring, yet still distant. Yitzchak brought godly revelation to the level of a field, something that is user-friendly, it can be cultivated and is within reach and essential for human life. But Yaakov, he was able to call it a house, and a house is a home. Yaakov makes a home for God in this world, and it's that level of revelation that will be shared by all the nations of the world in the future, when they will say, "Come, let us go up to the house of the God of Jacob." Why? What does this mean? Yaakov succeeded in revealing the Shekhinah, the divine presence, in every level of reality. This was his life's work. He was able to bring the world to know that Hashem's presence permeates all reality, even in the lowest level of creation, the inanimate, symbolized by stones. Even stones are replete with holiness, and they also reveal the presence of God in this world. And thus, open up your heart like you've never opened it before. Yaakov is called the stone of Israel, the foundation upon which all of Israel is built, because Yaakov was able to sanctify all of reality. This is Yaakov's unique strength and integral aspect of his life, and thus, at the start of his journey, he sets up a stone and declares, "This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gateway to heaven." A house is made of stones, meaning divine sanctity can be revealed even in the lowest level, that even this world can be a house for God. Everything about it reflects, calls out, declares divine sanctity. Yaakov sees a ladder whose top reaches into the heavens, but it's set firmly on the ground. And as we've learned, verse 12 states, "And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending bo," usually translated as in it, in the ladder, but really meaning bo, in him. Yaakov himself is the ladder. This is the role of a human being, to stand firmly on the ground while connecting heaven and earth. We provide the ladder for the angels to traverse. Continuing his journey, so Yaakov reaches the well, which contains life-giving water, and as the prophet Isaiah intones in chapter 51 and 55 and verse 1, "Let all who are thirsty go to the water." And the sages explain that there is no water but Torah. But he encounters a problem. The mouth of the well is covered by a huge stone, and not just any stone, but Torah, in its precision and perfection, specifies that it is ha-even, the stone, the particular stone, the one that we all know, the one that always trips us up, the stuff of everyday life that blocks us from infusing our material reality with the revelation of Hashem's presence. Great effort is required to remove the impediment and reach the living waters. But Yaakov, he easily removes the stone, revealing that actually there is no stone. Or, open up your heart, more so, how did he remove the stone so easily? He reveals that the stone itself is part of the divine revelation. So too, when Laban wants to make a covenant with Yaakov, listen carefully, Yaakov stresses to Laban that Hashem can't be kept out of this world. Laban wanted this to be a covenant that would clearly mark lines of demarcation between his world, the material world, and Yaakov's world, the spiritual world, as if Laban wished to say, "You stay there where you belong with your God, and see to it that he stays there too." But Yaakov demonstrates that this is God's world, that Hashem's presence permeates all. Thus he places a stone and instructs all his children, the tribes of Israel, to gather stones, because the task of Israel is to reveal Hashem in every level of creation, in all reality. Now let's return to that rather whimsical teaching that the stones were arguing over Yaakov, so they all became one under his head. What could that even mean? Let's open up your heart one more time in the deepest way. In the beautiful and life-changing work Mesilat Yesharim, the classic Path of the Just, which we are learning together in our Tuesday Zoom classes, the holy author, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, writes as follows. He says, "This world was created for man's use, but it's a matter of great balance, For if a person is drawn after the materialism of this world and distances himself from the Creator, he destroys himself and he destroys the world with him. But if a person exercises control over himself and clings to his Creator and utilizes this world only in order to aid him in the service of God, then he ascends spiritually and he elevates the whole world along with him. Because the greatest elevation for all creation is when creation serves a perfected individual who is sanctified with his Creator's holiness. And thus, the stones of the place which Yaakov placed under his head drew together and said, "Let the tzaddik rest his head upon me." Shalom. Thanks for watching. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at rabbi@rabbiRichman.com. Thank you for being part of Jerusalem Lights, and Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful Shabbat.